Hi, my name is Zoe Taylor, and I am a Davis student guide at Wellesley College. I'm also a member of the Yellow Class of 2023. It is my pleasure today to be interviewing Kelsey Miller, who contributed to our Q20 exhibition last semester, and I also had the fortune to have Kelsey as my drawing teacher last semester. This is such a great way to learn more about our artists and the people who contribute to the collection and special exhibitions at the Davis, so I'm excited for this conversation. Just in passing and out of pure curiosity, I was able to ask Kelsey during class and after class about her contributions to the Q20 exhibition after seeing it on opening night. So I'm excited that everyone else gets to hear the great synthesis and intent with her work and why she chose it to be a part of the Q20 exhibition. I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to do this interview. I remember seeing your work in the exhibition, and I think shortly after that in class, I was able to ask you about it a little bit, and we were able to talk about it. So I'm glad that we get to share this with the Davis community and other community members of the museum and Wellesley. So to begin, what did you learn as an undergrad that still influences your art practice today?
Yeah, I think, so I actually went to Wellesley for my undergrad, which is interesting, bringing it full circle. And I think something that is great about Wellesley and a liberal arts context in general is thinking, thinking a little bit more broadly about the things that we're working on and studying. So in the context of my work in printmaking, I think my undergrad experience really helped me expand my understanding and definition of what printmaking means or what it can be. And that's definitely something that I continue with in my practice now, because I still feel like my work is rooted in printmaking, but a lot of what I make, you wouldn't necessarily walk up to it and say this is a print. It might have elements of printmaking or some of those characteristics, like repetition, layering, that kind of thing. So yeah, I would say it's just more of an expanded understanding of a subject.
I like that, the expanded understanding of a subject, and kind of on the same lines and taking it into another perspective of your career. How does teaching influence your art and vice versa?
Yeah, and I think actually most of these questions in a way are connected and kind of lead into one another. For me, I really think of teaching as a conversation between myself and my students, and many times it kind of becomes a collaboration in that dialogue. I think I'm always kind of asking students to be open. You know, oftentimes we're walking into unknown territory with what you have to do in the studio. And so it's kind of, I think it's asking, like being comfortable with questioning or being comfortable with the unknown and exploration. And I feel like I have to remind myself to do that in my own studio practice. So it's kind of like it helps me continue expanding my own practice just as I'm asking students to expand their own practice.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely can attest to that, expanding my own practice as being one of your students. And I actually, just like last week, I was revisiting the still life assignment because I went a different route during class. So I wanted to do a traditional still life. I'll have to
Oh,
show you
cool.
after the interview.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think this spring semester for all of us was a huge learning curve, obviously, when we all had to shift gears so abruptly. So in a way, it was as much unknown territory for me as it was for you,
Mhm.
or for my students, you and the other students. And
Yeah,
I think we all together had to expand our understanding of what even was possible to do in terms of transitioning these very physical, tactile studio art classes into a more virtual world.
definitely. So the Davis mounts a faculty exhibition every 5 years. How did you decide on what to include in Q20?
I think the factor for me was being able to include something really current. It was something I made in, you know, in the months before it was even installed. And um, as an artist, as like a mid-career artist, I don't always have that opportunity to choose what is shown. Like we apply for shows, juried shows, or we're selected by curators, and they're looking for specific pieces. Um, so this show was the opportunity for us as artists to choose what we want to be shown um, of our work. And so, yeah, I wanted to do something current, also being in that location where I got to physically put up the work, as opposed to sometimes we have to ship the work and have others put it up for us. So then it's easier. It makes more sense for things to be like framed or in a more traditional presentation. So being able to work in the specific space, know how much space I had that I was able to use, and make something that hadn't been shown before.
Mhm.
And who
And
knows?
yes, and could you describe a little bit about your piece itself for those who haven't been able to visit the Q20 exhibition or have seen the work itself?
Yeah, so it's a series of prints, but they're attached to the wall with magnets, so they are a little bit dimensional. They're not just framed, and they're a double scale of a newspaper format that would be folded open and shut or folded up in various ways for looking at it. And so I took kind of the format of the weather page in the newspaper and used that as the jumping off point. And I have laser engraved phrases in there that are actually weather forecasting language, but for me, removing them from the actual newspapers where they were and isolating those phrases and putting them in a specific order kind of changed it to be a more, to give it a more like metaphorical angle, a different way of thinking about what those phrases might mean.
And just to take it back to a teaching perspective, what have you learned from your students?
Um, I think it's pretty similar to what I said before, but being comfortable with the unknown, because as a practicing artist, I think if we just make what we know and what we're comfortable with, it's it's hard to find the new things if you're not trying new things. And I think always asking the students to do that is a constant reminder to me to do the same. And I think watching students work and what you come up with, it can be refreshing in my own practice and just a reminder to not always go with what I know and be open to trying things that I won't necessarily know what the outcome will be.
Mhm.
And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but that's all part of the process.
Yes, definitely. And I've been trying to incorporate the idea of when I forget the book we read, but or the excerpt we read, but incorporating drawing into our daily practice
Yeah, I
and
think that was,
obviously with like midterms, I haven't been able to do that um consistently, but definitely during quarantine and over the summer I was able to tap into my creative side and like
yeah,
actually do more drawing outside of the class setting. So
yeah, that's so good to hear. I
yeah,
think you're talking about The Creative Habit by Twyla.
yes, the creative habit.
I actually have it on my desk right next to
Oh,
me.
that's perfect. I feel like I definitely have to get that book.
Yeah, that's a
Like
good
it's
one.
definitely an
And that
interesting.
is a good reminder too, because there are days where I have to make like remind myself to keep my practice as a priority in my life. It's easy to get distracted when you don't have structure or deadlines. So that is a good reminder, actually.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up.
And to bring it to the current day, present day, besides the Q20 exhibition and teaching last year, what are you working on now?
I actually have a few different projects right now, which is exciting. I'm not teaching this year, which has given me more time to be in my studio and have that practice and find more show opportunities. So I just last week finished an installation, and this was another site-specific installation that I got to go and put up myself in New Haven at the Ely Center for Contemporary Art. And that's a wall installation with actually nails and thread that's kind of writing out a long billboard size phrase on the wall. And I've also incorporated newspaper headlines and weather forecasting language in that piece. So it's still visually quite different, but content-wise, it's maintaining this kind of linear progression. So that's one thing. There's a museum here in Newport where I live, the Newport Art Museum, and they're opening a show next month called Call and Response, where they've invited a handful of artists to choose something from the museum's collection and make work in response to that. So I'm actually working with a relief sculpture that I'm taking graphite rubbings of from the surface. Some of them are actually on the wall behind me, those like gray.
Okay.
Hard to see, but those have figures in them, and that's really new because I don't usually work with figures in my work. So there's that, and then I have one other project that's more of a public art initiative in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where they invited artists to propose pieces for windows of businesses and abandoned buildings around the city. So I'm working on a 4x4 panel for one of those windows as well.
That's great. Yeah, and just to hear the fact that you're working with a relief and kind of doing rubbings on it, that's so interesting to me, especially as a Davis guide, kind of seeing every like thing we have on display and what we have in our collections, and you actually get to connect with the piece and the work itself on a different level in that call and response type of setting.
Yeah, and I was really happy that the curator actually allowed me to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm surprised that they let you do that.
Yeah.
What was that process like? Like, and how did you think of even going about like doing a rubbing or
well, I think that actually ties back to the beginning question of how printmaking is kind of inherently part of my practice, even though these rubbings aren't prints per se, but they are a repeatable image made from a matrix. And I think it also is another example of how my teaching influences my practice, because in the print class, when we moved remotely, we actually did a rubbing assignment where I was talking about making use of the environment and what around us and what we have available to us outside of the context of specialized equipment of a printmaking studio. So I'm in the museum, I don't have a press, but I can still make these multiplied images. And my plan is to turn these into a large kind of wall installation as well. I'm doing them on rolls of tracing paper and repeating different aspects of the relief sculpture in a way that creates some kind of patterning, but allowing images to emerge as well. So the rubbing for me was just a starting point to get to know the piece and see what was available to me based off of that piece. And I really took this project as a response. I was really paying attention to that word and trying not to go in with too specific an idea of what I was going to do with the piece, but really wanted to go in like, work with the piece and work on the piece and see what happened throughout the process. So I'm actually going back in there today, right after our interview, to
That's
take
so
some more.
exciting. And I love the way that this last question tied into the first question of influences and
Yeah.
artistic practice. So I just wanted to thank you for, again, for doing this interview. It was so nice to connect with you and hear more about your process and your background as an artist and how that also influences your teaching career.
Yeah.
So the Davis really appreciates it. We really appreciate your contributions to the collection or the exhibition. And yes, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. It's
Yeah.
good to see you, and I was so happy that it was you that got to interview me.
Yes, as soon
Feels
as I
like
saw
a real
your name.
conversation. That's good.
Yes, exactly. As soon as I saw your name, I like signed up and I was like, I'm picking Kelsey.